The lobby of the Halcyon Tower was designed to impress before a single word was spoken. Glass stretched from floor to ceiling, polished so thoroughly that the morning sun fractured into clean, blinding lines as it poured inside. The marble floors, imported, expensive, unnecessary, were veined with silver-gray streaks that caught the light with every passing step. A massive abstract sculpture dominated the center of the space, all sharp angles and brushed steel, the kind of artwork that made people tilt their heads and pretend they understood it. Everything about the building announced importance. Executives moved through the lobby with practiced urgency, shoes clicking in confident rhythms, eyes fixed on glowing screens or distant goals. Assistants hurried alongside them, juggling tablets and coffee cups, whispering reminders of meetings and deadlines. The faint hum of wealth lingered in the air, not loud or boastful, but steady and assured. And standing near the entrance like a self-appointed gatekeeper to all that prestige was the security guard. His name tag read D. Whitman, though few ever bothered to look closely enough to notice. He wore his uniform crisply, dark navy fabric pressed to sharp lines, boots polished to a mirror sheen. His posture was rigid, chest slightly puffed out, hands clasped behind his back, as if he were guarding something far more valuable than a lobby full of people who barely registered his existence. Whitman had been stationed at Halcyon Tower for nearly 6 years, and in that time, he had developed an acute sense of who belonged and who didn't. Belonging, in his mind, had very little to do with names on a guest list. It had everything to do with appearance. He knew the regulars by their tailored suits and confident strides. He recognized the investors by their expensive watches, the lawyers by their sharp haircuts and sharper expressions. Even the interns fit a certain look, eager, slightly nervous, but polished enough to pass through unnoticed. And then there were the others. The delivery drivers, the maintenance workers, the occasional lost soul who wandered in looking for a job interview or a firm that didn't exist. Whitman prided himself on catching those people early. So when the quiet man stepped through the revolving doors just after 9:30 that morning, Whitman noticed immediately. The man did not look like the others. He was dressed casually, almost offensively so, given the surroundings. Dark jeans, clean but unremarkable. A charcoal gray sweater with no visible logo or brand. Simple leather shoes that had clearly been worn often, though they were well cared for. No briefcase, no laptop bag, no Bluetooth earpiece buzzing with urgency. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had nowhere else he needed to be. Whitman's eyes narrowed. The man paused just inside the lobby, allowing the revolving doors to complete their gentle spin behind him. He took a moment to look around, not in awe, but with quiet observation, his gaze traveling from the sculpture to the reception desk, then up toward the elevators that disappeared into the upper floors. It was that pause that sealed it for Whitman. Tourist, he decided, or worse. The guard shifted his weight and cleared his throat loudly, the sound sharp enough to cut through the low murmur of the lobby. It was a practiced move, one he used to announce his authority without saying a word. The quiet man turned toward him. Up close, Whitman noted, the man looked to be in his early 40s, though there was something ageless about him. His hair was dark with faint strands of silver at the temples. His face was calm, composed, lined not by stress but by years of thought. His eyes, dark and steady, met Whitman's without challenge, without apology. "Yes?" the man said. His voice was soft, measured, not timid, just controlled. Whitman resisted the urge to sigh. "Can I help you?" he asked, though the words came out flat, almost bored. His gaze flicked briefly over the man's clothes, lingering just long enough to make the judgment obvious. The quiet man nodded once. "I'm looking to speak with someone about the building," he said. Whitman's eyebrow twitched upward. "The building," he repeated. "Yes." Whitman let out a short, humorless chuckle. "You'll have to be a little more specific," he said. "This isn't a museum." A few people passing nearby slowed slightly, curiosity piqued by the tone. Whitman noticed and liked it. He enjoyed an audience. The man didn't seem to notice at all. "I was told to come here this morning," he continued calmly. "I believe the meeting is scheduled for 10. Whitman checked his watch with exaggerated flair. "It's 9:30, he said. "And unless you're on the tenant list or you've got an appointment logged with reception, you don't just wander in and start asking questions." The quiet man glanced toward the reception desk, where a young woman typed rapidly, headset tucked behind one ear. Then he looked back at Whitman. "I don't believe my name would be on the tenant list," he said. "Well, that's reassuring," Whitman replied dryly, "because that would mean you don't belong upstairs." There it was, the line Whitman delivered so easily now, polished by repetition. The man studied him for a moment longer than necessary. Not with irritation, not with offense. Just observation. If Whitman had been more perceptive, he might have noticed the faintest hint of amusement flicker behind the man's eyes. Instead, he mistook the silence for uncertainty. "So," Whitman continued, his tone sharpening, "if you've got business here, you can start by telling me who you are and why you're wasting my time." The quiet man's lips curved, just slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something more restrained, more knowing. "My name is Elias," he said simply. Whitman waited. "And I'm here regarding the property." Whitman scoffed, the sound loud and unmistakably dismissive. "Let me guess," he said. "You're here to sell something, or complain about parking. Or maybe you've got a cousin who once cleaned an office upstairs, and now you think you've got a connection." A businessman passing by snorted under his breath. Whitman felt a small swell of satisfaction. Elias did not react. "No," he said quietly. "None of those." Whitman leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Look," he said, "I'll save you some trouble. This building hosts law firms, investment groups, and corporate offices. People upstairs pay more in rent every month than most folks make in a year. So unless you've got paperwork, credentials, or a reason that makes sense, I suggest you turn around before this gets embarrassing." Elias's gaze did not waver. "If you say so," he replied. Whitman blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. Most people got defensive. Some got angry. A few got flustered and started fumbling for emails or phone numbers, desperate to prove they mattered. This man did none of that. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, posture easy. The faint curve at the corner of his mouth remained, almost imperceptible. Whitman felt a twinge of irritation. "You're still standing here," he said. "Yes." "Which means you either didn't hear me," Whitman said, "or you think the rules don't apply to you." Elias considered this. "Perhaps, he said. "They apply differently." Whitman laughed outright now, a sharp bark that turned a few more heads. "Is that so?" "It might be." Whitman straightened, squaring his shoulders. "All right," he said. Then let's try this another way. Who exactly are you supposed to be meeting? Elias paused. Several people, he answered. Whitman rolled his eyes, the gesture exaggerated and unmistakable. Of course you are. The receptionist glanced up briefly, sensing the tension, but Whitman shot her a look that said, "I've got this." She returned to her screen. Whitman turned back to Elias, lowering his voice again. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing," he said, "but you picked the wrong building. Now, last chance. Leave or I'll have to escort you out." Elias's smile deepened by the smallest degree. "I'd prefer not to make a scene," he said. "Then do us both a favor and go," Whitman replied. For a moment, neither man moved. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Elias glanced once more around the space. The marble floors, the towering glass, the people rushing past without noticing either of them. When his gaze returned to Whitman, there was something new in it. Not arrogance, not defiance, certainty. "I will wait," Elias said. Whitman's jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that," he snapped. Elias's eyes flicked to the elevators as they chimed softly, doors opening to admit another wave of well-dressed professionals. "They'll be here soon," he said. Whitman stepped closer, invading the man's space. "This is your final warning." Elias met his stare calmly. "Take your time," he said. And then, as if the conversation were already over, he turned slightly, just enough to face the lobby once more, leaving Whitman standing there, fuming. Behind the guard's irritation, something else stirred. Doubt. Small, unwelcome, but growing. Because for the first time in years, Whitman wasn't entirely sure he'd read someone correctly. And the quiet man, standing patiently beneath the towering glass and steel, seemed perfectly aware of that fact. The guard's amusement did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a grin he tried, and failed, to suppress. Whitman stood there for a moment after the quiet man turned away, his jaw tight, his pride bruised in a way he hadn't quite processed yet. For years, his authority had gone unquestioned. People listened when he spoke. They moved when he told them to. The uniform, the badge, the position, it all worked like clockwork. This man had disrupted that rhythm simply by refusing to react. Whitman exhaled sharply through his nose and let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if he'd just encountered the world's most predictable nuisance. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. Elias did not turn around. That, more than anything, fueled Whitman's irritation. The guard stepped to the side, positioning himself just slightly in front of the man again, ensuring that Elias could not fully ignore him. He glanced deliberately at the man's shoes, then up at his sweater, then back to his face, letting the silence stretch. "You know," Whitman said, voice dripping with mock concern, "there's a cafe down the street. They've got decent Wi-Fi. You might feel more comfortable there." A couple waiting near the elevators exchanged a glance. The woman shifted uncomfortably. The man smirked. Elias tilted his head just a fraction. "Thank you," he said. "I'm fine here." Whitman laughed again, this time louder. "Suit yourself," he replied. "Just don't say I didn't warn you." He took a step back, folding his arms across his chest. His posture relaxed now, casual. The tension had transformed into something else. Entertainment. Whitman had seen this type before. Men who wandered in thinking they could bluff their way into importance. They usually cracked under pressure, started talking too much, or too little. Eventually, they all folded. He decided to enjoy it. "So," Whitman said, rocking back slightly on his heels, "you always dress like that for business meetings? Or is today a special occasion?" Elias glanced down at himself, as if seeing his clothes for the first time. "Yes," he said, "this is how I dress." Whitman snorted. Figures. A pair of sharply dressed men stepped out of the elevator nearby, their conversation pausing briefly as they took in the scene. One of them raised an eyebrow, the other barely concealed his grin. Whitman gestured subtly toward Elias with his chin. "Guy thinks he's got a meeting upstairs," he said to no one in particular. "Says it's about the building." The men chuckled politely and continued on their way. Elias remained still. Whitman leaned closer again, lowering his voice. "Let me give you a piece of advice," he said. "In places like this, appearance matters. People upstairs won't even look at you if you don't look the part." Elias met his eyes calmly. "That hasn't been my experience," he replied. Whitman raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "No," Elias said gently. "People usually listen." Whitman laughed outright now, a full, unrestrained sound. "Listen to what?" he asked. "You haven't said anything." "That's true," Elias agreed. The simplicity of the response caught Whitman off guard for a split second. He recovered quickly, waving it off. "Well, you should start talking," he said. "Because right now you look like a guy who wandered into the wrong place and doesn't know how to leave." Elias nodded. "I understand how it looks." Whitman grinned. "Good. Then we're on the same page." The receptionist glanced up again, more deliberately this time. She watched the interaction for a moment, uncertainty flickering across her face. Whitman noticed and shot her a reassuring smile. "All good here," he said, "just handling a misunderstanding." She hesitated, then nodded and returned to her work. Whitman turned back to Elias, emboldened. "Let me guess," he continued. "You're waiting for someone who told you they'd take care of everything, right? Big promises, vague details." Elias smiled faintly. "Something like that." Whitman chuckled. "Yeah," he said. "Thought so." Time passed. The lobby grew busier as the morning wore on. The steady flow of people continued, heels clicking, voices murmuring, elevators chiming. And through it all, Elias stood there, unmoving, patient. Whitman watched him closely now, trying to catch a crack, a twitch of irritation, a sign of embarrassment. Anything. There was none. It unsettled him. "So what do you do?" Whitman asked suddenly. Elias considered the question. "I make decisions," he said. Whitman barked a laugh. "Don't we all?" "Perhaps," Elias replied. "But not all decisions carry the same weight." Whitman tilted his head, amused. "That right?" "Yes." Whitman shook his head slowly. "You've got a funny way of talking," he said. "Real mysterious." "I find it saves time," Elias answered. Whitman smirked. "Sure it does." He glanced at his watch again, then back at Elias. "Tell you what," he said. "If whoever you're waiting for doesn't show up in the next 5 minutes, you're done. Fair?" Elias nodded. "Very." Whitman felt a flicker of triumph. There it was, a deadline, something concrete. He could already imagine the man's quiet disappointment when no one came, the inevitable shuffle toward the door, the silent defeat. 5 minutes passed. then 6. Whitman checked his watch again, tapping the face with a finger. "Looks like your people are running late," he said. Elias did not move. "They're rarely late," he replied. Whitman laughed. "Sure they are." Another minute passed. Whitman straightened. "All right," he said. "That's enough." He stepped forward, placing himself squarely in front of Elias. "I asked you nicely," he said. "Now I'm telling you. It's time to go." Elias looked at him. "I will," he said. Whitman paused. "You will?" "Yes," Elias said calmly. "When the conversation I came for is finished." Whitman's smile faded. "You don't get to decide when that is." Elias inclined his head slightly. "I believe I do." Whitman scoffed. "There it is," he said. "The attitude." Elias said nothing. Whitman felt the familiar rush, the sense of control, of dominance. He raised his voice slightly, ensuring others could hear. "Sir," he said firmly, "you are not authorized to remain on these premises. If you do not leave immediately, I will escort you out." The word escort carried weight. It drew attention. People nearby slowed. Conversations paused. Elias remained composed. "I'd prefer not to be touched," he said politely. Whitman laughed. "Oh, don't worry," he replied. "I'll be gentle." A ripple of laughter spread from somewhere behind him. Elias's eyes flicked briefly toward the sound, then back to Whitman. "I'm asking you to reconsider," he said. Whitman leaned in. "Or what?" Elias hesitated. "Or you may find yourself embarrassed," he said softly. Whitman froze, for just a moment. Then he burst out laughing. "Embarrassed?" he repeated. "By you?" He shook his head, incredulous. "You know what's embarrassing?" he continued. "Standing in a multi-million-dollar building dressed like you're running errands and thinking you belong here." Elias absorbed the words without flinching. "I see," he said. Whitman felt emboldened now. "Let me spell it out," he said. "This place isn't for everyone. It's for people who've earned it. People with money, power, influence." Elias nodded. "Yes," he said. "It is." Whitman sneered. "And you don't fit that picture." Elias looked past him, toward the elevators. "That depends on who's looking," he said. Whitman scoffed again. "All right," he said. "Enough." He reached out, not touching Elias, but close enough to be threatening. "I'm going to ask you one last time to leave. If you don't, I will remove you." Elias did not step back. "I understand," he said. The calmness in his voice caused something to shift in the room. The laughter died down. The air grew heavier. Whitman sensed it but pushed through. "Good," he said. "Then we're clear." He took a breath, preparing to act, and then, "Mr. Whitman?" The voice came from behind him. Whitman turned sharply. The receptionist stood up now, headset removed, her expression tense. "Yes?" he snapped. "There's someone asking for you on line 2, she said. "And," Whitman waved a hand. "Busy," he said. "Tell them to wait." Her eyes flicked to Elias, then back to Whitman. "They said it was important," she insisted. Whitman scowled. "Everything's important to someone," he said. "I'll deal with it in a minute." He turned back to Elias. "Where were we?" he said. Elias looked at the receptionist, then at Whitman. "I believe," he said, "we were about to reach the part where things become complicated." Whitman smirked. "For you," he replied. Elias smiled again. Not wider, just firmer. Somewhere above them, an elevator chimed. Whitman felt it, a strange tightening in his chest, an unease he couldn't quite place. Still, he pressed on. "Last chance, Fao," he said. Elias nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." The receptionist cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitman," she said again, louder now. "They said to tell you that the buyers have arrived." Whitman frowned. "Buyers?" Elias's eyes lifted. "That would be them," he said. Whitman laughed reflexively. "Good timing," he said. "Maybe you can watch how real business gets done." Elias said nothing. The elevator doors slid open. Several figures stepped out, well-dressed, purposeful, scanning the lobby with intent. And every single one of them looked straight past Whitman, straight at Elias. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. And for the first time since the quiet man had walked through the revolving doors that morning, Whitman felt the ground beneath his confidence begin to crack. Whitman did not notice the shift at first. At the beginning, it felt like nothing more than a minor disruption to his routine, an irritation, easily managed. The quiet man still stood near the center of the lobby, hands relaxed at his sides, posture neutral, as if waiting for a bus rather than occupying the ground floor of one of the city's most expensive commercial buildings. Whitman adjusted his belt and exhaled sharply, letting out a low chuckle. "You've got patience," he said, shaking his head. "I'll give you that." The man turned slightly, acknowledging him without urgency. "I've learned it's useful," he replied. Whitman smirked. "Sure," he said. "Patience is great when you've got nothing else going on." The jab landed where it was intended, or at least Whitman expected it to. But the man didn't react. No tightening of the jaw, no flush of embarrassment, not even a sigh. Instead, he nodded politely. "That's one way to look at it." Whitman's amusement grew. He could feel it now, this strange, guilty pleasure in poking at someone who refused to push back. It was like teasing a wall and waiting for it to crumble. He took a step back, giving himself a broader view of the man, then laughed again. "Can I ask you something?" Whitman said. "You already have," the man replied. Whitman grinned. "Fair enough," he said. "What exactly made you think this place was for you?" The man considered the question longer this time. "I was invited," he said. Whitman rolled his eyes dramatically. "Of course you were." A young professional passing by slowed, clearly listening now. Whitman noticed and leaned into it. "You know how many people say that every week?" he continued. "Everybody's invited. Everybody's got a meeting. Funny how none of them ever have proof." "I don't usually need it," the man said quietly. Whitman laughed out loud. "That's a good one," he said. "You should write that down." The man smiled faintly. "I don't think I'd remember it later," he said. Whitman snorted. "Right, because you'll be long gone by then." Time moved forward in uneven spurts. People flowed through the lobby in waves, some pausing to watch, others pretending not to notice. A few lingered near the elevators longer than necessary, their curiosity barely concealed. Whitman fed off it. He shifted his stance, leaning casually against the security desk now, arms crossed, confidence radiating outward. So tell me, he said, is this your first time trying something like this? Trying what? The man asked. Blending in, Whitman replied, hoping nobody notices you don't belong. The man looked around the lobby slowly, thoughtfully. I don't feel like I'm blending, he said. Whitman laughed again. No, he agreed. You really aren't. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the small audience. Someone whispered something under their breath. Whitman didn't care what it was, only that the attention remained. He straightened and gestured broadly at the building around them. Look at this place, he said. Every inch of it costs money. Real money. People upstairs don't waste time. They don't wait around. And they definitely don't show up dressed like they're heading to the grocery store. The man glanced down at his clothes again. They're comfortable, he said. Whitman shook his head in disbelief. Comfortable, he repeated. That's what you're going with? Yes. Whitman let out a low whistle. You know what? He said. I respect the confidence, I really do. Walking into a place like this without a suit, without credentials, without a clue, it takes guts. The man inclined his head slightly. Thank you. Whitman blinked, then laughed harder. Oh, I wasn't complimenting you, he said. I know, the man replied. That response drew a brief silence. Whitman's smile faltered, just for a moment. He recovered quickly. All right, he said. Let's make this easier. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a tone that suggested reason, though the condescension remained. Tell me who you're meeting, he said. A name. Any name. Give me something. The man met his eyes. They know I'm here, he said. Whitman scoffed. Everyone knows everything in your head, huh? The man didn't respond. Whitman straightened again, his patience thinning. You know, he said louder now, I deal with people like you all the time. Folks who think staying quiet makes them interesting, mysterious, important. The man remained still. It usually doesn't, Whitman continued. It usually just means they've got nothing to say. I disagree, the man said. Whitman raised an eyebrow. Oh. Silence, the man replied, can mean many things. Whitman chuckled. In your case, he said, it means you're out of your depth. The man absorbed the words. There was a flicker then, not of anger, but something heavier, a quiet weight behind his eyes. Still, he said nothing. Whitman noticed the pause and pressed harder. Let me guess, he said. You were hoping someone important would walk by and rescue you, give you a nod, maybe shake your hand. The man glanced briefly toward the elevators. Something like that, he said. Whitman laughed. Keep dreaming. Minutes passed. The guard checked his watch again, tapping it deliberately. You're really committed to this, he said. I almost admire it. I try to finish what I start, the man replied. Whitman's amusement sharpened into mockery. Funny, he said. Because from where I'm standing, you haven't started anything. A woman near the reception desk shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable now. She glanced at the quiet man, then at Whitman, uncertainty written across her face. Whitman noticed and waved her concern away with a grin. All good, he said. Just a misunderstanding. The man looked at her briefly and offered a polite nod. She looked away. Whitman leaned closer again, voice low. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. You could have left 10 minutes ago with a little dignity. The man considered this. Dignity, he said slowly, isn't something you lose by waiting. Whitman scoffed. No, he said. You lose it by standing around while people laugh at you. The man's jaw tightened, just barely. Whitman saw it and smiled. There it is, he said softly. Finally felt that one, didn't you? The man exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. I felt it, he said. And? Whitman asked. And it passed. That unsettled Whitman more than he cared to admit. He stepped back, raising his voice again. All right, he said. Enough games. The surrounding conversations quieted. Even the elevator chime seemed louder than before. I've given you more time than I should have, Whitman continued. You're not authorized to be here, and you're disrupting the building. The man nodded. I understand your position, he said. Good, Whitman replied. Then you'll leave. Not yet. Whitman's smile vanished. Excuse me? I said not yet, the man repeated calmly. Whitman laughed, but there was no humor in it now. You don't get to decide that, he snapped. The man met his stare, unwavering. I believe I do, he said. A hush fell over the lobby. Whitman felt it, the attention, the eyes, the weight of being watched. His pride surged in response. You're really pushing it, he said. You think being calm makes you untouchable? The man said nothing. Whitman leaned in close. Because it doesn't, he said quietly. It just makes you easier to drag out. The man's shoulders stiffened, the first visible sign of strain. Whitman caught it instantly. There we go, he said. That's the discomfort. That's reality setting in. The man swallowed, then nodded. You may be right, he said. Whitman straightened, satisfied. Glad we agree, he said. Now turn around. The man did not move. Whitman's jaw clenched. I'm not asking, he said. The man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. I'm asking you, he said softly, to reconsider. Whitman laughed again, louder than before. Reconsider what? How this ends, the man replied. Whitman shook his head. You don't get an ending, he said. You get escorted out. The man looked past him, toward the elevators once more. They should be here soon, he said. Whitman followed his gaze, then laughed. You're still holding on to that? He asked. No one's coming. The man said nothing. Whitman raised his voice. Last warning, he said. Leave now. The man remained where he was. Whitman reached out, stopping just short of touching him. I won't ask again. The man looked at the guard's hand, then back at his face. I'd rather you didn't, he said quietly. Whitman sneered. Or what? The man hesitated. Or this becomes difficult for you, he said. Whitman froze. Then he laughed harder than ever. For me? He said. You? He shook his head. You really don't know where you are, do you? The man didn't answer. The elevator chimed. Whitman ignored it. All right, he said. That's it. He took a breath, preparing to act. Behind him, the receptionist stood abruptly. Mr. Whitman, she said, voice tight. Whitman waved her off. Not now, he snapped. She hesitated. They said to let you know, she continued, that the meeting is about to begin. Whitman frowned. What meeting? The man finally shifted his weight. The one I came for, he said. Whitman laughed reflexively. Perfect timing, he said. You can watch from outside." The elevator doors slid open behind him. Whitman didn't turn around. He didn't see the way several sharply dressed individuals stepped out. He didn't notice how their eyes locked onto the quiet man. He didn't feel the subtle change in the room. Not yet. But the man did. And for the first time since he'd walked into the building that morning, his calm expression carried something new. Relief. And something very close to resolve. The laughter did not stop all at once. It thinned. What had been scattered chuckles and murmured amusement across the lobby softened into uneasy silence, as though the room itself sensed that something had shifted. Whitman still stood squared in front of the quiet man, his posture rigid, chin raised, authority clutched tightly in his hands like something fragile. Behind him, the elevator doors slid shut again, with a soft mechanical sigh. Footsteps followed. Measured, confident, purposeful. Whitman did not turn around. "You can go," he said sharply, assuming the movement behind him belonged to yet another passerby lingering too long. "This doesn't concern you." No one answered. The quiet man, Elias, did. "It does," he said gently. Whitman frowned. "You don't get to decide that," he snapped, though the edge in his voice betrayed a flicker of strain. Elias did not argue. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his sweater. The movement was small, unassuming. But it was enough. Whitman's eyes followed it automatically, his training kicking in. His muscles tensed, preparing for resistance, for defiance, for some final act of stubborn foolishness. What Elias withdrew was not a weapon. It was a slim leather folio. Black, worn, the kind of thing that had been carried for years, not for show, but for necessity. Whitman scoffed. "Oh, now we're doing props?" he said. "What's that? Fake paperwork?" Elias didn't respond immediately. He opened the folio with careful fingers, as though the contents mattered deeply. Inside were neatly organized documents, clipped, annotated, precise. He did not wave them around. He did not shove them into Whitman's face. He simply held them at his side. "I won't need these," Elias said quietly, "but I brought them just in case." Whitman laughed again, though it came out thinner this time. "In case of what?" "In case someone insisted on certainty," Elias replied. Whitman opened his mouth to retort. Then a voice spoke from behind him. "Elias." The word cut cleanly through the air. Whitman stiffened. He turned. 3 men and 1 woman stood several feet away, all dressed in sharp, tailored attire that spoke of money without trying to impress. Their expressions were not curious. They were respectful. The woman stepped forward first. "We apologize for the delay," she said. "Security flagged the arrival, and we were rerouted." Elias inclined his head. "No trouble," he said. "I arrived early." Whitman blinked. Once. Twice. He looked from the group to Elias, then back again. Something cold slid into his chest. Is there a problem here?" the woman asked, her gaze finally landing on Whitman. Whitman straightened reflexively. "No," he said too quickly. "Just handling a situation." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What situation?" Whitman hesitated. "This man," he said, gesturing toward Elias, "was refusing to leave the premises." Elias smiled faintly. "I was waiting," he corrected. The woman's expression softened when she looked at him. "Yes," she said. "We know." Whitman felt the blood drain from his face. The tallest of the men stepped forward now, extending his hand toward Elias. "Everything is ready," he said. "Conference room is secured." Elias shook his hand and, "Thank you." Whitman's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to recover. "But who exactly—" The woman cut him off. "You're speaking to Mr. Elias Mercer," she said. "Principal buyer." The words did not land immediately. They hovered. Whitman frowned. "Buyer?" "Yes," she replied. "Of Halcyon Tower." The lobby seemed to tilt. Whitman laughed reflexively. "That's—" He stopped, because no one else was laughing. Elias turned slightly toward him. "I didn't intend for this to be public," he said calmly. "But circumstances have a way of forcing clarity." Whitman stared at him. "You're buying the building?" he asked. "I already have," Elias said. The words were delivered without emphasis, without pride. They landed anyway. Whitman felt heat rush to his face, then cold. His thoughts scrambled, grasping for footing. "That's not possible," he said weakly. "This building, this place, was placed under contract 3 weeks ago," the woman said. "Final signatures were completed this morning." Elias glanced at his watch. 20 minutes ago," he added. Whitman swayed slightly. "You're joking," he said. Elias shook his head. "I don't joke about investments." The quiet settled in fully now. People nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. The receptionist had risen halfway out of her chair, eyes wide. Conversations across the lobby had stalled. Whitman's authority, so solid minutes ago, crumbled audibly. "I didn't know," he said. "I know," Elias replied. Whitman swallowed. "If I had, you would have behaved differently," Elias said. The truth of it stung more than accusation. Elias turned back to the group. "Shall we?" he asked. They nodded. Whitman stepped aside instinctively, moving out of the way as though compelled by gravity itself. Elias passed him, stopped. He turned back once more. "For what it's worth," Elias said, "I didn't come here to embarrass you." Whitman looked up at him, eyes raw. "But you did," he whispered. Elias considered this. "No," he said, "you did." Then he continued toward the elevators. The doors slid open. Elias and the group stepped inside. As they turned, Elias glanced back one final time. "This building will be undergoing changes," he said evenly. "Some immediate, some gradual." Whitman nodded numbly. "And your position?" Elias added. Whitman froze. "That," Elias said, "will be reviewed." The doors closed. The lobby exhaled. Whitman stood alone amid the marble and glass, the echoes of his own laughter ringing painfully in his ears. He had mistaken silence for weakness. And now everything he thought he controlled had slipped quietly out of his hands. Above him, the elevator rose. And with it, the understanding that consequences were no longer hypothetical. They were simply waiting. The quiet that followed felt unnatural, as though the lobby itself had grown self-aware. Whitman shifted his weight, irritation sharpening into something louder as the man remained exactly where he was. The audience that had gathered, small, subtle, pretending not to watch, had not dispersed. If anything, they leaned in emotionally, waiting for a conclusion Whitman fully expected to control. "Well," Whitman said, "you heard me." The man, Elias, looked at him for a long moment. There was no challenge in his gaze, no threat, only attention, the kind that made people suddenly aware of themselves. "Yes," Elias replied. "I did." "And you're still here," Whitman snapped. "Yes." Whitman laughed, sharp and brittle. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm enduring it." That landed differently than Whitman expected. He frowned, irritation flaring. "Funny way of showing it," he said. "Most people would have left by now." "Most people," Elias replied evenly, "wouldn't be here." Whitman scoffed. "There you go again," he said, "talking like you're special." Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his sweater, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. Whitman stiffened. "Hey," he said. "What are you doing?" Elias withdrew his hand, holding a phone. Nothing flashy, no oversized screen or jeweled case. It looked old even, its edges worn smooth from use. "I'm making a call," Elias said. Whitman laughed. "To who?" Elias looked at the screen briefly. "Someone who's been waiting for me," he replied. Whitman waved a dismissive hand. "Go ahead," he said. "Call whoever you want. You're still leaving." Elias raised the phone to his ear. The ringing sounded louder than it should have. One ring, two, a pause. "Elias," a voice said on the other end. Clear, professional, alert. "We were just about to reach out." "I know," Elias replied. "I was delayed." Whitman's amusement wavered. "Yes," the voice continued. "Security?" "Yes," Elias said. A brief silence followed. "Understood," the voice replied. "We're on our way down." Elias ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Whitman stared at him. "That's supposed to impress me?" he asked. "No," Elias said. "It's supposed to save time." Whitman shook his head, forcing a laugh. "You think a phone call changes anything?" Elias met his eyes. "It usually does," he said. Whitman stepped closer, voice low. "You're not in charge here," he said. "I am." Elias nodded. "For the moment," he replied. Whitman's jaw tightened. "You're really committed to this fantasy," he said. "Let me guess. Someone's coming down to vouch for you?" "Yes," Elias said. Whitman laughed. "Good," he said. "They can watch you leave." Minutes passed. The elevators chimed once, then again, but none opened. Whitman checked his watch, irritation returning. "You know," he said, "I almost admire how calm you are. Most people would be sweating by now." Elias exhaled slowly. "I've learned not to rush moments like this," he said. "Why's that?" Whitman asked. "Because," Elias replied, "they tend to reveal more than you expect." Whitman rolled his eyes. "Listen to yourself," he said. "You talk like this is some big turning point." Elias offered a faint smile. "For you," he said, "it might be." Whitman scoffed again, but the sound lacked conviction. "All right," he said. "Enough waiting." He took a step forward, then stopped. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. 3 people stepped out. 2 men and a woman, each dressed with the quiet precision of people accustomed to being obeyed. Their eyes scanned the lobby, then settled on Elias. The woman smiled. "There you are," she said. Elias inclined his head. "Thank you for coming down." Whitman turned sharply. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman looked at him briefly. "We'll speak in a moment," she said. Then to Elias, "Everything all right?" "Yes," Elias replied. "Mostly." Whitman's confusion deepened. "Hey," he said. "You can't just—" The taller of the men stepped forward. "We can," he said calmly. "And we are." Whitman opened his mouth, then closed it. Elias reached into the leather folio he had been carrying all along. He removed a single document, not waved, not displayed, simply held. "This," Elias said softly, "is the finalized transfer." Whitman stared. "What transfer?" Elias looked at him fully now. "The building," he said. Whitman laughed reflexively. "You expect me to believe that?" "Yes," Elias replied. "Eventually." The woman stepped forward. "He's correct," she said. "Ownership changed this morning." Whitman's smile faltered. "That's not—" "You were notified," she added. "Your supervisor acknowledged receipt." Whitman felt the floor tilt beneath him. Elias folded the document carefully and returned it to the folio. "I didn't plan to mention it here," he said. "But you insisted." Whitman swallowed. "You're saying you bought this place?" Elias considered the wording. "Yes," he said. "That's the simplest way to put it." The words hung in the air, understated and devastating. Whitman searched Elias's face for arrogance. There was none, only calm. "And now," Elias continued, "I believe it's time we go upstairs." The group nodded. Whitman stepped back automatically. As Elias passed him, he paused. "You asked earlier what made me think I belonged here," Elias said quietly. "This." Whitman did not respond. The elevator doors closed. As the car ascended, the lobby remained frozen, caught between disbelief and realization. Whitman stood alone, staring at the place where Elias had been, understanding too late that the moment he'd treated like a joke had been something else entirely. And somewhere above him, decisions were already being made. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Whitman felt the laughter die in his throat. It wasn't sudden. It didn't snap shut like a door. It thinned, stretched, and faded into something hollow as the quiet man remained standing there, unhurried, untouched by the tension he had created simply by refusing to bend. "All right," Whitman said, clapping his hands once sharply. "This has gone on long enough." Elias looked at him. "Yes," he said. "It has." Whitman scoffed, though his voice carried less certainty now. "You don't get to agree with me," he said. "You've wasted enough time already." Elias nodded, as if conceding a point. "I apologize," he said. "That wasn't my intention." Whitman blinked. The apology caught him off guard, not because it sounded false, but because it sounded sincere. "You apologize," Whitman repeated. "Now?" "Yes," Elias said, "for the inconvenience." Whitman let out a dry laugh. "You know what's inconvenient?" he said. "Standing here arguing with someone who thinks politeness is a substitute for permission." Elias regarded him quietly. "No," he said. "I think politeness is a choice." Whitman shook his head, irritated. "You really like hearing yourself talk, don't you?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his sweater. Whitman's hand twitched toward his radio. "Don't," he warned. Elias paused, meeting his eyes. "I'm not reaching for anything you need to worry about," he said calmly. Whitman hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Make it quick," he said. Elias withdrew a folded document this time, thicker than a single page, edges crisp, ink still dark and new. He did not open it immediately. He held it there between them, letting its presence do the work. "What's that?" Whitman demanded. "A confirmation," Elias replied. Whitman laughed reflexively. "Of what?" Elias unfolded the document with deliberate care. "Of ownership." Whitman's smile froze. "Ownership of what?" Elias lifted his eyes. "This building." The words were not raised. They were not emphasized. They were delivered the way one might state the weather. For a moment, Whitman simply stared. Then he laughed. A sharp, incredulous sound that echoed too loudly against the marble. "That's funny," he said. "That's actually funny." Elias said nothing. Whitman shook his head, still laughing. "You really went all in on this story," he said. "Props, paperwork, phone calls, what's next?" Elias waited. The laughter slowed. Because something was wrong. No one else was laughing. Whitman noticed it gradually. The receptionist standing stiffly behind the desk, eyes fixed on the document. The small cluster of onlookers no longer smirking, no longer whispering. Even the ambient noise of the lobby seemed muted. Whitman's gaze flicked to the paper again. "What is this?" he asked, more quietly. Elias turned the document so Whitman could see the header. The name at the top was unmistakable: Halcyon Tower Property Transfer Agreement. Whitman swallowed. "That doesn't mean anything," he said quickly. "Anybody can print something like that." Elias nodded. "You're right," he said. "Which is why I didn't bring it to convince you." "Then why bring it at all?" Whitman snapped. "Because," Elias said, "sometimes it helps people understand what's already happened." Whitman's chest tightened. "Look," he said. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" His radio crackled. "Whitman," a voice said. "You seeing this?" Whitman stiffened. "Seeing what?" he asked. A pause. "The update," the voice replied. "Ownership change came through. Top priority notice." Whitman felt his mouth go dry. "That's not—" "Conference team is en route to the lobby," the voice continued. "Stand by." The radio went silent. Whitman stared at it, then at Elias, then back at the document. His amusement collapsed into confusion. "You planned this," Whitman said. Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "I scheduled a meeting." Whitman's breathing grew shallow. "You let me—" "I allowed you," Elias corrected gently, "to decide how you wished to behave." Whitman's face flushed. "So you're really saying—" "Yes," Elias said. "I purchased the building." The words settled heavily between them. Whitman's eyes darted around the lobby, searching for something familiar. Control, authority, certainty. He found none. "That's not possible," he whispered. "It is," Elias replied. "And it's done." The elevator chimed. Whitman flinched. The doors opened and several executives stepped out, their movements precise, their expressions focused. They spotted Elias immediately. "Mr. Mercer," one of them said, "we're ready when you are." Whitman's breath caught. Mr. Mercer. The name echoed in his mind, rearranging everything that had happened over the last hour. Elias nodded. "Just a moment," he said. He turned back to Whitman. "I want you to understand something," Elias said quietly. "I never needed you to believe me." Whitman's voice trembled. Then why say anything at all? Elias considered this. Because you mistook silence for insignificance, he said. And I wanted to correct that assumption. Whitman swallowed hard. I didn't know, he said. I know, Elias replied. That matters, Whitman insisted. Only in hindsight, Elias said. The executives waited, respectful, saying nothing. Elias glanced toward them, then back at Whitman. This building, he continued, will change hands quietly. Most people will never notice. Whitman nodded numbly. But behavior, Elias said, is always noticed. Whitman looked down. What happens now? He asked. Elias paused. Now, he said, we see what you do with this moment. Whitman looked up, eyes searching. And my job? Elias did not answer immediately. That will be decided later, he said, by people who weren't standing here laughing. The words struck harder than any accusation. Elias folded the document and returned it to his pocket. He turned toward the elevators. The executives followed. As the doors began to close, Elias looked back one final time. Quiet people, he said calmly, often arrive long before they're noticed. The doors slid shut. Whitman stood alone in the lobby, the echo of his own confidence collapsing around him. Above him, meetings were beginning, decisions were forming, and consequences, real ones, were finally on their way. The lobby did not return to normal after the elevator doors closed. If anything, the stillness deepened. Whitman remained where he stood, his reflection staring back at him from the polished marble floor, distorted and unfamiliar. The uniform that had felt like armor only minutes earlier now felt heavy, constricting, too tight around the chest, too visible. People slowly resumed moving, but the energy had changed. Conversations restarted in hushed tones, footsteps softened, eyes lingered longer than they should have. Sliding toward Whitman and then away again, as though witnessing a private unraveling they had no words for. The receptionist was the first to break the silence. Mr. Whitman, she said carefully. He turned, startled. Yes? Her expression was polite, but distant now, professional in a way it hadn't been before. I just received a message from facilities, she continued. They've been instructed to update access protocols immediately. Whitman nodded, though the words barely registered. Okay, he said. Another pause. They asked that you remain available, she added, for follow-up. Whitman swallowed. Right, he said. Of course. She hesitated, then sat back down, the soft click of her keyboard echoing louder than it should have. Whitman exhaled slowly. He replayed everything in his mind, not as a continuous memory, but in fragments. The first laugh, the eye roll, the jokes he'd made because they were easy, because they earned him attention, because they reinforced a version of himself he'd grown comfortable inhabiting. He had assumed the quiet man would shrink. He had assumed silence meant surrender, and now that assumption sat in his chest like a stone. His radio crackled again. Whitman, came the voice of his supervisor, tighter than usual. I need you in the office. Whitman closed his eyes. Understood, he replied. As he moved toward the service corridor, the lobby seemed larger than before, the ceiling higher, the distance longer. Every step echoed with awareness. Upstairs, the atmosphere was entirely different. Elias walked at an unhurried pace down the hallway toward the conference room, the executives flanking him like quiet, orbiting bodies. No one rushed him. No one interrupted. The woman who had spoken first in the lobby glanced at him. "I apologize again," she said. "You shouldn't have been delayed." Elias shook his head. "It was instructive," he replied. She studied him briefly, then nodded. The conference room doors closed behind them with a muted thud, sealing off the glass and marble below. Documents were laid out. Seats were taken. Elias remained standing for a moment, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Cars moved like quiet currents far below. People hurried through streets, unaware that ownership of a landmark had shifted hands without fanfare. "Before we begin," Elias said, "I want something noted." The room stilled. "The interaction downstairs," he continued, "was not unique. It was simply visible." One of the men frowned slightly. "Are you suggesting a personnel issue?" he asked. Elias considered. "I'm suggesting a culture issue," he replied. No one spoke. "That building," Elias said, gesturing faintly toward the window, "has operated under the assumption that authority announces itself loudly, that power looks a certain way, dresses a certain way, behaves a certain way." The woman nodded slowly. "And you disagree?" she said. "I do," Elias replied, "and I intend to change that." Pens moved. Notes were taken. Elias took his seat. Back downstairs, Whitman sat across from his supervisor in a small office that suddenly felt much smaller than it ever had. "You want to tell me what happened?" the supervisor asked. Whitman opened his mouth, closed it, then spoke. "I made an assumption," he said. The supervisor leaned back, studying him. About who belonged," Whitman replied. Silence stretched. "You understand the position we're in now," the supervisor said carefully. "New ownership doesn't look kindly on incidents like this." Whitman nodded. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" Whitman looked down at his hands. "I thought my job was to judge," he said. "To decide." "And now?" Whitman hesitated. "Now I think my job was to listen," he said quietly. The supervisor sighed. "That may be the first smart thing you've said today," he replied. The meeting upstairs stretched on. Policies were discussed. Transitions outlined. Timelines established. Elias listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was measured. "I'm not interested in spectacle," he said at one point. "I'm interested in alignment." "With what?" someone asked. "With reality," Elias replied. The words echoed. By the time the meeting adjourned, the sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the city. Elias gathered his folio and stood. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin quietly." They nodded. Downstairs, Whitman was dismissed with instructions he barely heard. He returned to his post, posture altered, eyes sharper, but not in the same way as before. When another casually dressed man entered the lobby an hour later, Whitman watched him carefully. Not to judge, to understand. The man asked for directions. Whitman gave them politely. No scoff, no laughter, no assumption. As evening approached, Elias exited the building through a side entrance, unnoticed by most. He paused once on the sidewalk, looking back at the glass facade reflecting the sky. He did not smile. He simply nodded, as though acknowledging something complete, but not finished. Inside, changes were already taking shape. Quietly. And for those who believed power always announced itself, the most unsettling truth was just beginning to settle in. This was not an ending. It was preparation. Morning arrived without ceremony. The building woke the same way it always had, lights flickering on floor by floor, elevators humming to life, the faint echo of footsteps returning to familiar rhythms. To most, it looked unchanged. To those paying attention, everything felt slightly misaligned, as if the center of gravity had shifted overnight. Whitman arrived earlier than usual. He stood outside the revolving doors for a moment before entering, adjusting his uniform with deliberate care. The fabric no longer felt like armor, but it no longer felt like a costume either. It was simply what he wore. A responsibility, not a shield. Inside, the lobby greeted him with its usual grandeur, marble floors, steel accents, the quiet confidence of a place accustomed to being important. Yet Whitman noticed things he hadn't before. The way people hesitated before speaking. The subtle glances exchanged. The absence of laughter where it used to linger too easily. He took his position and stood still, not rigid, present. Upstairs, Elias watched the city come into focus through the glass walls of his temporary office. He had not slept much, not from anxiety, but from thought. Ownership brought clarity, but also responsibility. Power, he had learned long ago, did not demand noise. It demanded precision. His phone vibrated. A message. "Ready when you are," Elias replied with a single word. "Proceed." Downstairs, Whitman's radio crackled. "Security team, please report to conference room B," came the announcement. "Mandatory attendance." Whitman exhaled. This was it. The room filled slowly, guards taking seats, some whispering, others silent. Whitman sat near the back, hands folded, posture neutral. His supervisor stood at the front alongside a woman Whitman did not recognize. She spoke first. "I'm not here to reprimand," she said. "I'm here to observe." Whitman felt a strange sense of relief. Elias entered quietly moments later. The room fell silent. He did not stand at the podium. He did not take center stage. He simply leaned against the table, hands resting lightly on its edge. "Good morning," he said. A few murmured responses followed. "I won't take much of your time," Elias continued. "I want to talk about yesterday." Whitman's pulse quickened. "There was an interaction," Elias said. "One that revealed more than it intended to." He let the words settle. "I'm not interested in blame," he said. "Blame is loud and inefficient." Some shifted uncomfortably. "I'm interested in awareness," Elias went on, "because awareness changes behavior." His gaze moved across the room, not accusatory, simply observant. "This building sees thousands of people every day," he said. "Some powerful, some not. Some who look the part, some who never will." Whitman felt the words land squarely on his chest. "Your role," Elias continued, "is not to decide worth. It's to maintain safety and dignity, both." He paused. "Yesterday," Elias said, "dignity was optional." No one spoke. Whitman swallowed. "That ends now," Elias said. He straightened slightly. "There will be changes," he continued. "Training, oversight, expectations." A few heads nodded. "But there will also be grace," Elias added, "for those willing to learn." His eyes settled briefly on Whitman, not with judgment, with recognition. Whitman felt something loosen inside him. This isn't about me buying a building, Elias said calmly. It's about what happens when no one thinks you can. The room remained silent. That concludes this conversation, Elias said. The rest will be shown, not said. He left as quietly as he had entered. Afterward, Whitman was asked to stay behind. The supervisor closed the toggle door. You know why you're here, he said. Whitman nodded. Yes, he replied. There was a pause. You're not being terminated, the supervisor said. Whitman's breath caught. But you are being watched, he continued, closely. Whitman nodded again. That fair? Yes, Whitman said. More than fair. The supervisor studied him. You embarrassed us, he said plainly. I know, Whitman replied. You also showed us something, the supervisor added. What happens when authority forgets its purpose? Whitman looked up. I won't forget again, he said. See that you don't, the supervisor replied. Later that day, a man entered the lobby wearing worn shoes and carrying a scuffed briefcase. He hesitated near the desk, eyes scanning the space uncertainly. Whitman noticed immediately. He approached with measured steps. Can I help you? Whitman asked. The man nodded, surprised by the tone. I'm here for an interview, he said. I think I might be early. Whitman smiled, not broadly, not falsely. That's all right, he said. You're welcome here. The man relaxed visibly. Upstairs, Elias watched the lobby feed on a muted screen. He saw the exchange. He turned away. By evening, the building settled into its new rhythm. Nothing dramatic, no announcements, just small corrections compounding into something different. As Elias prepared to leave, his assistant spoke. You could have made an example of him, she said. Elias paused. Yes, he replied. I could have. But you didn't. No, Elias said, because the goal was never humiliation. What was it then? Elias considered. Alignment, he said again. Outside, the city moved on. Whitman finished his shift quietly, nodding to the night guard as he passed responsibility along. He stepped out into the cool air, feeling lighter, not forgiven, not absolved, but awake. He looked back once at the building. For the first time, he didn't see power. He saw people. And somewhere above him, Elias closed a folder, already thinking about the next meeting, the next correction, the next unseen moment where quiet choices would matter most. The story had never been about a purchase. It had been about recognition. And that, Elias knew, was only the beginning. The silence that followed the revelation was heavier than any raised voice could have been. Whitman stood frozen near the center of the lobby, his mouth slightly open, the apology half-formed and useless on his tongue. His throat tightened, and he swallowed hard, the sound audible to no one but himself. Moments earlier, the space had felt like his territory, defined, ordered, controlled. Now it felt foreign, as though the floor beneath his boots had subtly shifted, leaving him unsure of his footing. I didn't, he began, then stopped. Elias was already turning away. It wasn't dismissal. It wasn't triumph. It was simply final. Whitman tried again, the words tumbling out clumsily. Sir, Mr. Mercer, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I wouldn't have. Elias paused, just long enough to acknowledge the sound of Whitman's voice. He did not turn fully around. He did not correct him. He did not linger on the apology. "I believe you," Elias said calmly. The simplicity of the response struck harder than anger would have. Whitman's shoulders sagged slightly, the tension draining out of him and leaving behind something raw. "I made a mistake," Whitman said quietly. "I judged you." Elias nodded once. "Yes," he said. "You did." There was no accusation in his tone, only fact. "I won't do it again," Whitman added quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. Elias finally turned, meeting Whitman's eyes. For the first time, Whitman noticed how tired they looked. Not weary, but seasoned. Eyes that had seen power misused and underestimated too many times to be surprised by it anymore. "I hope not," Elias said. "But what matters more is what you do next." Whitman nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. Elias walked toward the exit with the same unhurried pace he had maintained all morning. People parted instinctively, some recognizing him now, others sensing only that this man mattered in ways that did not announce themselves. The revolving doors turned. Then he was gone. Whitman remained where he was, the echo of Elias's words looping in his mind. What you do next. For the first time in years, Whitman felt exposed, not because he had been seen, but because he had been understood. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Conversations felt distant. Instructions blurred together. Every interaction replayed the moment in the lobby, each memory now reframed with painful clarity. He thought of other faces he had dismissed, other people he had waved away without a second glance. It wasn't cruelty, he realized. It was convenience. And that realization unsettled him more than anger ever could. As his shift ended, Whitman lingered by the doors, watching the last of the day's visitors leave. The building felt different now, not grander, not diminished, just quieter, more aware. He caught his reflection in the glass again, but this time it didn't feel distorted. It felt honest. Somewhere across the city, Elias sat in the back of a car, watching the skyline blur past. He did not replay the confrontation. He had learned long ago not to dwell on moments like that. They were never about vindication. They were about mirrors. He thought of the countless times he had been underestimated, by clerks, by executives, by people who mistook restraint for weakness. Each time he had learned something new about the person in front of him. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they learned something too. Success, Elias reflected, was rarely loud when it mattered most. The loudest successes were often compensating for something else. The quiet ones endured. Back at the building, Whitman turned off the lights at his post and stepped outside into the cooling evening air. He looked up at the towering glass facade, no longer seeing it as a symbol of authority, but as a place filled with stories, most of them invisible unless you bothered to look. He adjusted his jacket and walked away, carrying with him a lesson he hadn't asked for, but clearly needed. The danger of underestimating people, he realized, wasn't just that you might be wrong. It was that you might miss who they really are. And sometimes, by the time you finally see it, they've already moved on. The days that followed unfolded without spectacle, yet nothing felt ordinary to Whitman anymore. He returned to work with a different awareness, one that made even familiar routines feel newly weighted. Each greeting mattered. Each question carried implication. Where he once scanned faces for status, he now noticed posture, tone, hesitation, the subtle signals of people who were used to being overlooked. The immediate aftermath of that day lingered like a quiet echo. His supervisor never raised his voice. There were no formal reprimands posted on bulletin boards. No whispered gossip passed openly. Instead, there were conversations, measured ones. Conversations that forced Whitman to explain not just what he did, but why he had done it. And each time he reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. "I assumed," he would say. That word became heavier with repetition. Assumed the man didn't belong. Assumed silence meant insignificance. Assumed authority was visible. None of those assumptions survived scrutiny. What unsettled Whitman most was not that he had been wrong, but how easily he had been wrong. How naturally arrogance had disguised itself as confidence. How quickly humor had become a weapon instead of a bridge. At night, he replayed the moment Elias had looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. That look had stripped away every justification Whitman had relied on. It hadn't demanded submission. It had demanded reflection. And reflection, Whitman was learning, was far more difficult. He began to notice changes around him as well. Not dramatic ones. Subtle shifts. New training sessions focused less on authority and more on awareness. Supervisors reminding guards that dignity was not conditional. Conversations framed around responsibility rather than control. The building itself seemed quieter, not emptier, but calmer. Whitman watched people differently now. The janitor who arrived before dawn, the courier who avoided eye contact, the intern who clutched a badge like a shield. Each of them carried a story Whitman had once ignored, and he wondered how many Elias-like figures he had misjudged before, people who had simply chosen not to announce themselves. Across the city, Elias continued his work largely unseen. He attended meetings, signed documents, asked difficult questions in calm voices. He dismantled outdated assumptions with patience instead of force. When executives pushed back, he listened. When they expected spectacle, he offered consistency. To many, he seemed unremarkable. That, he knew, was precisely the point. Power, Elias believed, revealed itself best through restraint. The louder someone needed to prove themselves, the less secure their position usually was. True influence didn't rush. It didn't posture. It waited. He thought often of the guard, not with resentment, but with understanding. Whitman had not been cruel by nature. He had been careless, and carelessness, Elias knew, was the more dangerous flaw. It spread quietly, justified itself easily, and excused harm without ever raising its voice. If there was a lesson to be taken from the encounter, it wasn't about wealth or status or ownership. It was about perception, about the stories people told themselves when they looked at someone and decided, within seconds, how much respect they deserved. That lesson extended far beyond a single lobby. To anyone watching from the outside, the story might have seemed satisfying for the wrong reasons. A man mocked, then revealed as powerful. Tables turned, justice served. But the deeper truth was less dramatic and far more uncomfortable. The problem was never that the quiet man had power. The problem was that he was treated as disposable until that power became visible. And that truth applied everywhere. In workplaces where titles mattered more than character. In conversations where volume outweighed substance. In lives where people were measured by appearances instead of actions. The world rewarded confidence loudly, often mistaking it for competence. Meanwhile, humility went unnoticed, quietly building foundations others would later stand on. Whitman carried that understanding with him every time he put on his uniform. He spoke less, listened more. And when new guards joined the team, eager and certain, he offered them simple advice. "Don't assume," he would say. "You never know who you're standing in front of." Some laughed. Some nodded. A few listened. That was enough. Months later, the building functioned as it always had. Efficient, polished, respected. Most people never learned who owned it. Fewer still knew about the moment that had quietly reshaped its culture. And that was exactly how Elias preferred it. Because humility didn't need recognition to work. It worked anyway. Life, he knew, had a way of turning tables when least expected. Not with noise or spectacle, but with timing. With patience. With consequences that arrived long after arrogance assumed it was safe. In the end, the greatest power wasn't in buying a building. It was in choosing not to weaponize that fact. And the greatest lesson wasn't about being underestimated. It was about what kind of person you became when you underestimated someone else. Arrogance demanded attention. Humility earned respect, and one of those always outlasted the other.